Thank you for that. An effective way to shut me up. It is 6 o'clock almost. Very good. I call City of Wilsonville. Are we ready? Is the video,
yes,
audio running?
We are rolling.
Yes. Okay. I call the City of Wilsonville Planning Commission meeting of January 13, 2021 to order. Please do the roll call.
Chair Cameron Messbaugh.
Here.
Vice Chair Ron Heberlein.
Here.
Jerry Greenfield.
Here.
Brianne Tusinski.
Here.
Jennifer Willard.
Here.
Erin Woods.
Here.
And new member Olive Gallagher.
Here.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll all stand for the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The next item is citizen input. Do we have any citizen input? Anybody registered?
No, we do not.
I heard nobody is going to be at the city hall, but they were going to register ahead of time to talk through Zoom if they wanted to. Nobody?
We do not have any participants.
Okay. The next item is our annual election. But before we do that, since we have our new member to the Planning Commission, I think we should welcome Ms. Gallagher, and perhaps we should do our annual routine of introducing ourselves, and then we can move on with the agenda. Do you want to start, Olive, if I can call you Olive by your first?
That's one way to welcome me.
Put you on the spot.
I'm Olive Gallagher. I've been in Wilsonville now for 4 years. I spent most of my life as an ethicist and consultant, and I am now also an Oregon real estate broker.
Thank you very much. Welcome indeed.
Thank you.
Jerry, you want to go next?
Yeah, Jerry Greenfield. I've lived in Wilsonville since 2009, having returned to the United States after 14 years in Japan. I immediately, or very soon after getting to Wilsonville, began observing Wilsonville city government, and was eventually appointed to Development Review Board, a couple terms, and from there to Planning Commission, and served a couple of years on Planning Commission as a chair. My background is a college teacher. Among the subjects that I taught, relevant to work here, is environmental aesthetics.
Thank you. Aaron?
Yeah, Aaron Woods. I've been in Wilsonville since 1996. I was recruited to come here to create a program for Xerox Corporation. Recently retired from Xerox in 2019. I have been extremely busy my entire almost 25 years here. I spent 2 terms on the Development Review Board, I was just recently appointed in January. Well, I say recently, it's been a year now, January of 2020. I'm involved with a number of other city initiatives, which I won't get into, but welcome Olive.
Thank you.
To our wonderful planning commission.
Jennifer, you want to go next?
Absolutely. My name is Jennifer Willard. I have been in Wilsonville since 2014, and I, like the others, served on the Development Review Board before becoming part of one of the planning commissioners last January. Welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. Brianne?
Hi, I'm Brianne. I was actually just appointed in August, so I haven't been on the Planning Commission all that long myself, but I've lived in Wilsonville since 2018. I kind of grew up in the Stafford area before that, and during the day I am a real estate appraiser. So welcome to the board. Commission, I should say.
Thank you. Ron? You're muted. So I'm not the only person who's being shut up.
No, they turned my permissions off, so no unmuting for me. Yeah, so thank you. Ron Haberline. I have been on Planning Commission for almost 2 years now. Prior to that, I was on the Development Review Board. I have lived in Wilsonville for coming up on 9 years, and I'm the engineering manager at Columbia Helicopters just down the street. And have enjoyed my time on the commission. It's a great group. We have a good time, as much as you can, with some of these very wonky policy discussions. So welcome, Olive, and glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I am Kamran Mesbah. This is my second year of my second appointment to the commission. I moved here in 2015 from the Wisconsin area. I am a civil and environmental engineer and urban, regional, and environmental planner by training and by profession. But I'm retired, so I spend my time doing volunteer work mostly now. And indeed, welcome to you. This is a wonderful commission and very friendly, innovative, and active group.
I forgot to give you my Wilsonville pedigree. I was the vice president of the Friends of the Library when I first moved here, and then I was invited on the enhancement board, where I got to know the mayor quite well and a number of people in the city. I also participated in the Citizens Academy, so I've hopefully done a little bit of my homework before I got here.
Wonderful. Okay, now our next agenda item is to elect chair and vice chair. I'll ask Ryan Adams, our assistant corp counsel, to fill us in on the procedure.
Good evening, Chair. This is a little awkward because we are doing it over Zoom. So some of you will remember how we did it last year. We are going to keep it as close as we can to that. Unfortunately, with everyone being on the internet, it does tend to be a little different than normal. So again, my name is Ryan Adams. I'm the Assistant City Attorney. It appears that we have certainly a quorum here tonight. And I am going to read the following script. After I'm done reading that script, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. At this time, the Planning Commission will elect a chair and vice chair subject to the following rules. We will begin with the nomination for the position of chair of the Planning Commission. Any member of the commission can nominate someone for chair. You may nominate yourself. Nominations do not have to be seconded. If you are nominated but do not want the position, simply state that you decline the nomination. When the nominations stop, the chair will call for any more nominations. When no more nominations are forthcoming, the chair will declare the nominations closed. Once the nominations are closed, I will read the names of the nominees and direct the recorder to proceed with a roll call vote for each respective nominee. If one person receives a majority of votes, the chair will declare the result of the vote. If no one receives a majority of the votes, we will redo the roll call until one person receives a majority of the votes. No nominee may be dropped unless that person voluntarily withdraws from consideration. Upon completing of the election of the chair, we will then elect the vice chair in the same manner, by first nominating candidates, then closing nominations, then voting until one person receives a majority of the votes, and then with the chair declaring the result. Does anyone have any questions? All right.
Very good. So I open the floor to nominations for chair. Jerry?
I nominate Cameron Mesbah to be reelected.
Thank you. Aaron?
That's what I was going to say. So that was my nomination for Jerry's already said it.
Thank you. Anybody else? I would like to nominate Aaron Woods, just to get even with him. Any other nominations? One more call, just in case you had an epiphany. Very good. So now we're going to have the...
Correct.
voting.
Mr. Chair, have you declared the nominations closed?
Sorry about that.
Mr. Chair, did you declare the nominations closed?
Just did.
Okay. The nominations for chair having been closed, the nominees are as follows. Chair Cameron Mesbah, and for chair, Aaron Woods. Madam Recorder, would you read the roll call vote starting for chair, and that will be, we will vote now on Cameron Mesbah for chair.
Jerry Greenfield.
You want a name?
Mr. Greenfield.
I respond with a name, is that correct?
That's incorrect, Mr. Greenfield. At this time, you vote either yay or nay for Chair Mesbah being reelected as the chair.
Yay.
Ron Heberlein.
Yay.
Olive Gallagher.
Yay.
Aaron Woods.
Yay.
Jennifer Willard.
Yay.
Brianne Tasinski.
Yay.
And Cameron Mesbah.
Nay.
Mr. Chair, although it's somewhat awkward, the way that it's supposed to work is that you are supposed to declare the winner, which is you. So.
Aaron Wood could get 7 votes. Why are we jumping the gun?
No, I disagree. I think that, the way that that's been done, I think makes sense.
Okay.
Be careful what you wish for.
I declare Cameron as the chair. Now we move to nominations for vice chair.
I nominate Jennifer Willard.
Your hand?
Okay, I didn't know if you wanted to call on me. I would like to nominate Ron Heberlein.
Any other?
Now I can't nominate you, Jennifer, to get back for nominating me because it's already been done. So we'll just leave it at that.
Cameron, you got my nomination?
Yes.
Okay.
You nominated Jennifer. Any other nominations for vice chair? Last call? Okay, I hereby close the nominations.
All right. The chair having closed the nominations, we have 2 nominees for the position of vice chair. The first is Jennifer Willard. The second is Ron Heberlin. Madam Recorder, we will now take a vote on Jennifer Willard for the position of vice chair. Please proceed with a roll call vote.
Cameron Mesbah.
Yay.
Jerry Greenfield.
Yay.
Olive Gallagher.
Yay.
Jennifer Tusinski.
You said Jennifer and Tusinski. Which one do you want?
Excuse me, Brienne Tusinski.
Yay.
I apologize.
Right, yay.
Oh, sorry. Ron Heberlin.
Yay.
Aaron Woods.
Yay.
Jennifer Willard.
Nay. But thank you.
Okay. Brian?
Mr. Chair, the vote having been closed, it's your responsibility to declare the winner, which appears to be Jennifer Willard.
Then I declare Jennifer Willard as a vice chair.
All right. Thank you. That process was much smoother than it could have been.
Should we try again for a rougher kind of a process? Is that? Thank you. The next item on the agenda is consideration of the November 12, 2020 Planning Commission minutes. That was the last meeting of last year, December having been canceled. Commissioner Greenfield.
I have a question. In the past, we have also elected a chair of the Committee for Citizen Involvement. That has often been the vice chair of the commission. Are we not treating the CCI this time?
That's a good question. I have no answer for it because I don't recall having done that last year when
No, we did not.
I was elected chair. So does anybody have an answer to that, Ms. Batechel?
I cannot recollect us doing 2 different nominations either. We did not do that last year after I had consulted with Ms. Gail Hinman. It's not clear to me, and Ryan may not have the answer tonight either, of whether that is something that we are supposed to do separately, or whether it is the chair of the Planning Commission who serves in the same capacity as the CCI. We could either make a motion to have the same chair and vice chair for those positions to just double check ourselves, or we could wait until next month's meeting and we can have this discussion then when we have a chance to look at the code, or at the end of the meeting if we have time to look at the code between now and then.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I would recommend that you entertain a motion to table that and allow planning director and the assistant city attorney to get together and look to the code and Robert's rules to determine what might be appropriate, and maybe we could bring it up next meeting.
Okay, Jerry.
I apologize for throwing a monkey wrench in it. I'm probably just allowing my recollection as the old man on the committee to reach back too far.
What are you saying, though? Do you want...
I know that in the past we have had a separate chair of the CCI.
So, okay with...
I'm reaching well back, maybe.
Would you like to make a motion to table it?
Yes, I think that'd be a good idea. I move that we table this till our next meeting. In the meantime, Ms. Bayshel can do the research necessary to find out what we should be doing.
All right.
I second the motion.
We have a motion made, second discussion. Any other thoughts? If not, all in favor? Yay?
Okay.
Yay.
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 Opposed? Okay, so the homework is has been set. The first homework of the year. And we will revisit it whenever the answers are in place. Okay, back to the consideration of the minutes. Are there any corrections, any additions, changes to the minutes? I had only one on page 5 of 7, where key issue cottage cluster units on a single lot versus individual lots are summarized. At the fourth bullet under that heading is Chair Mesbah believed that the flexibility would allow the city to buy lots and develop affordable housing. I think it should be could, because it depends on the political will, whether or not the city buys certain land to develop affordable housing and all that. That may be beyond the scope of the wishes of the city council at this point. So I was just making a statement that states that could be a possibility. That is my only comment on the minutes. Any other changes or additions? Okay, so we need a motion on the correction.
I'll move to approve the minutes as amended by Chair Mesbah.
Is there a second?
Second.
We had two seconds. And I didn't catch. Was it Ms. Gallagher and Ms. Jasinski?
Yes.
Which one?
I was first.
Commissioner Gallagher seconded. Any discussion on this? If not, all in favor, say yay.
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 Opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved as amended. Moving along, work session has to do with the compliance with middle housing changes, and I will ask our Director of Planning, Ms. Bateshell, to take the floor.
Thank you, Chair Mesbah and Commissioners. As Chair noted, our work session this evening is really focused on Wilsonville's Middle Housing Project. This is a project that Daniel Pauly, Planning Manager, is managing. This project both helps us achieve compliance with the state's House Bill 2001 Middle Housing Bill that was adopted last year, or 2 years ago, I guess now, with the administrative rules being adopted late last year. This work program is also, if you'll remember, helping us to implement actions from the city's equitable housing strategic plan that was also adopted in 2019. So tonight's work session, the project team is bringing back to you tonight some additional revisions to the, or additional information on the work that we presented to you in November. So if you'll recall, back in November, you began discussions on how the comprehensive plan and the city's community development code relate to the new policies in House Bill 2001. We took feedback from you on your initial direction on what we should kind of be doing from a high policy level on those. We took that feedback and we've provided some updates in the packet after additional work we did based on that input. We also have in the packet, the team has prepared for your review a master plan memo. This is really to look at some of our master planning areas and see how those intersect with the changes that are in House Bill 2001. And those are particularly important because, as you know, we have the Frog Pond area where we are anticipating to see significant growth in the near future, where some changes may be necessary or be relevant. So the project team is here tonight. I'm going to introduce Dan, and he will go ahead and introduce the rest of the team. As I mentioned, Daniel Pauly is planning manager with the City of Wilsonville and the project manager for this project. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bateshell. Good to see everyone again tonight. And again, special welcome to Commissioner Gallagher. I've had the opportunity to visit with her a couple of times, including on this topic, and it's been a pleasure. Also introduced with me tonight from Angelo Planning Group is Joe Dills and Kate Rogers, who will be helping with the presentation tonight. So Kate, if you want to go ahead and put up the PowerPoint.
Okay, I'll do that.
And we can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So Ms. Bateshell has laid out what we discussed previously. So the topics of discussion specifically tonight will be about auditing those legislative master plans, specifically Frog Pond West, which will be a main focus, as well as Villabaugh Village Master Plan. We're also going to touch the Old Town Neighborhood Plan. Though not a legislative master plan, there's some changes we feel would be helpful to make it relevant in the current statutory environment. A big part going forward and focus of the project is going to be citing and design standards. And we've done some background research on that so far and presented a memo on that topic and want your initial feedback there. And then, as Ms. Bateshell mentioned, we'll be talking specifically about attached and detached duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, and land divisions, and kind of talking what research and things we found out since our November meeting and get your further guidance there. So go ahead, next. Wanted to remind the commission about the lenses really that we're using as we look at this. And that includes, obviously, compliance with the House bill and related administrative rules adopted in December by the Land Conservation and Development Commission. Also, as all of our code updates, we want to make sure they're usable and practical and actually get to move forward outcomes that the city's looking for, and also focus on the equitable housing component of it. We are talking more about kind of the goals of this project with council in February, and we'll bring any of that additional feedback from them to you at the next meeting. Go ahead and next. So let's go ahead and go on out to Frog Pond. So as many of you will recall, the Frog Pond West Master Plan was adopted in 2017. It envisioned a primarily single-family homes with some duplexes. The code specifically allows attached single-family up to 2 units and duplexes throughout the zone, but as adopted, it's subject to density limitations. And so I'll be coming back to that notion of density limitations quite a bit tonight. I also want to take this opportunity to mention that we're only talking about Frog Pond West. At this point, Frog Pond East and South compliance, while important, is going to be part of our upcoming project. Obviously, this middle housing project will inform the Frog Pond East and South Master Planning project that will be kicking off this year, but the actual compliance for those future growth areas will be looked at as part of that project. Also, the Frog Pond area plan, we're not reaching back to that, as it's not binding. They're really meant to be refined as part of the master planning process. And so really the master plans are the documents we need to look at in order to make sure, as they are part of our comprehensive plan, make sure that they accurately reflect the new state standards. So next. So as the city worked with the state and other jurisdictions on the rulemaking process and other stakeholders, which, as I mentioned, concluded just here in December, we strongly advocated for some context-specific considerations from master plan communities, as Wilsonville has and continues to develop primarily as larger master plan communities. The state subsequently adopted some unique compliance rules for existing and future master plan communities. And the future master plan communities part will come into play with Frog Pond East and South. But for Frog Pond West, as well as Villebois, as we'll talk about later, the specific rules related to existing master plan communities come into play. So what the rules say that for existing master plan communities, for the most part, the rules allow the master plans to be built out as planned if two provisions are met. First of all, that the city, as mandated by the House bill, allow all lots that would have allowed a single family home to also allow duplexes. And the second one is that the master plan allow for an overall net density of 8 units per net acre. So that really brings up two questions. Is first of all, and Frog Pond West actually is currently under that 8 units per net acre at about 6.7. So that brings up two questions. Can it be updated and still use these rules around existing master plan communities? And the other one is what counts towards that density calculation. And I'll explain that a bit more. So at this point, I'm going to slow down and try to explain something that's, I'll admit, is a bit convoluted. But so you may have to rewind and watch this a few times. I hope I can explain it clearly. But I've practiced and it sounded fairly clearly, but it's takes some thought. So let me give it a shot, and happy to go back, answer questions, or I have some analogies in my back pocket if needed, but they're a little corny, so I'm going to try to avoid using them. So first of all, there's two things that really is required for these existing master plan areas, or in this context of Frog Pond West specifically. So the state's requiring the density to be increased to a certain level. The other one is that the state's requiring that you can't limit the ability to build a duplex on any single family lot, really making then the duplex is exempt from density requirements similar to how ADUs are in our code today. So in this scenario, if it was just this first requirement to bring the density up to a certain level, you could just essentially add units to the master plan somehow to the point where you get to that 8 dwelling units an acre. But because of the second requirement and the need to exempt duplexes from density to avoid, let me take a breath here. And that really allows, that's necessary to avoid the potential that max density would be met before all the lots are built. Because what you need to preserve is that ability of the last lot in the subdivision to also have a duplex, even if you're already over what would have otherwise been planned as the density. So really, those are some key concepts that really will come into play as we talk about some compliance options. So any questions on that before I move on? Is that making sense at all?
I see all shaking heads in approval.
Okay. So go ahead and go to the next slide if you want, Kate, and I'll give a quick introduction, then pass it off to Joe here. So as we've followed and developed an understanding of the details of the rules applicable to Frog Pond West, the project team really explored 3 primary options for compliance. And Joe will walk us through this, and really your feedback on a recommended option is one of the key things we're looking for from the PC tonight. So go ahead, Joe.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Hi, good to see you. Joe Dills with Angelo Planning Group. So to achieve the requirements that Dan just explained, there are really 3 different ways that Wilsonville could go about it. And I have more slides about each one of these, but to give you an overview, option 1 would be the least amount of change to the existing system, meet our requirement for allowing duplexes everywhere, and if you do the math, you comply by exceeding the minimum 8 units per acre. As a backdrop, as adopted, Frog Pond West calculates to 6.7 units per acre in its current form. Option 2 would be to make some changes to the Frog Pond map to increase one or more of the subdistrict areas to very specifically increase the number of units on those properties and therefore go beyond the allowance of duplexes to ensure that there is a sufficient number of units on the subdistrict minimums and maximums, and through that process, adding more units and allowing for the duplexes, you comply. And then option 3 is to sort of open up the approach even more and allow all middle housing types. So not only duplexes, but triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, the whole array of middle housing throughout Frog Pond. So let's take a look at each, and I'll tell you a few of the characteristics. What we're looking for, by the way, just looking ahead, is your sense tonight of your preferences towards these options. We can do this over the course of 2 discussions. So we're introducing the material tonight and would like to get your questions and feedback and expressions of preference if you're ready to do that. Okay, so option 1, as I said a moment ago, keeps the minimum and maximum unit counts that are adopted today on each part of Frog Pond West. And the code simply has really basically a 1-sentence addition that says that the duplex requirement is not counted towards those maximums. So on an individual property, if you could build 10 single-family detached homes today, then that would still be in place if you want to do single-family detached. But if you exercised your right to do duplexes, you could do 20 on that particular property. That's option 1. Let's go to the next slide if we could, Kate. So here's a few things to think about relative to that. It's listed here as a somewhat different housing concept for Frog Pond West. Maybe another way to characterize it is this is sort of the minimum change to Frog Pond West that would also comply with the state rules for middle housing. And of the 3 choices that we're presenting tonight, it adds the least additional housing and density to Frog Pond West. There is some due diligence to be done to check the infrastructure capabilities. As you know, the properties that are at the southern end towards Beckman Road are under development. Those water and sewer lines are in, those stormwater systems have been begun, and we want to make sure that the properties that are north of that area, the future projects to come in and be developed, all of the infrastructure still works when we add this density. The numerical estimate is that if everybody were to exercise their right to add duplexes on their properties, and you add it all up at the end, then we're probably 80 or 90% above the maximum numbers that were calculated for the original work. On the housing side, what this does, of course, is enable more middle housing to be implemented in Frog Pond West. That's not only consistent with where the state has directed us to go, but it is also a step towards implementing Wilsonville's equitable housing goals. A couple other points about this. The maximum density kind of forecast here, or rather estimate of 80 to 90%, as you all well know, the ability to develop on a given property is subject to market conditions, desires of the owners, the ability to do stormwater management, tree preservation, a lot of things that tend to deduct from the theoretical maximum development capability. So when we think about these numbers, you have to put a little bit of a governor on them for those realities that need to be done when a project is built. One more point about the infrastructure I'll make is that not only do we have to verify the infrastructure, but you can think about this additional housing as making the infrastructure that will be built all that more efficient, because you have X number of units on the same amount of pipes and facilities that are serving, and the cost per lot, hopefully passed on to the cost per home, is more efficient. Okay, option one, add duplexes. Let's go to the next option. So option two would do everything that I just said, but also have a revision to this map. So the map that you're looking at is the adopted subdistrict map for the residential neighborhood zone. As a reminder, the RN zone is a little bit unique. It's a single zone that covers all 180 acres of Frog Pond West. And because there was physical planning done as the prelude to this, laying out where we thought was appropriate for small, medium, and large lot and housing forms, this map was created to guide where they can be. And each one of these subdistricts that are listed here simply has a minimum number and a maximum number of dwelling units that is permitted within it. Very simple, clear system that works with the original master plan. And so option two would get to the 8 units per acre by recoloring, so to speak, a little bit of this map so that we could recalculate the number of units that were assured if all the developers chose to do single-family development and a few duplexes like they do under the current rules. So let's see, make sure I made all the points here. Increase the maximum dwelling unit counts, modify the subdistrict, that's the recoloring of the map, and we may, there may be some rules that go along to specify where reduced lot sizes could be permitted. So if we go to the next slide, let's think about those characteristics of this option. It's fairly consistent, although I would say it's a step more different from the first one I described to you than the original housing content of Frog Pond West. Like the other point about infrastructure, we would have to verify, but it's fairly consistent, we think, with the systems that have been designed, and they do get more cost effective. The numbers go up with this because not only are we counting more duplexes as at least an allowance, but we're also counting the fact that we have recolored the map a little bit and changed the plan from what was adopted. And then we've characterized this as moderate implementation of the city's equitable housing goals because it provides a little more middle housing in the area in theory, and therefore would be more implementation of that equitable plan. A reminder that all of this does have a little bit of a theoretical side to it because, like I said, whether you have trees or how you manage stormwater or whether you've got an existing home on your lot, all determines the capability. And we simply don't know at this point how many developers would choose to do more middle housing on their properties. The strongest of the markets is clearly single-family detached, but of course there is a strong demand for housing choices that's out in the market, and it remains to be seen how much of this increased allowance developers would undertake. And let's go to the next slide. Yeah, option 3. So option 3 would be the sort of the most robust implementation of where the state rules want communities to go by allowing all of the housing types. So you would end up with more attached housing in Frog Pond West through this system. The whole array of middle housing types would be allowed on all of the remaining properties. If we go to the next slide. So this is a very different housing concept than was adopted. I should take a sidebar. It was adopted, of course, through a public planning process. So that's something to keep in mind. But it does maximize the opportunity for middle housing, would require, I think, a significant reanalysis of the infrastructure systems. The theoretical density allowance could go up by as much as 3 times from what was originally master planned for Frog Pond West. And this is obviously a very robust implementation of equitable housing goals and policies. So that's those options. Let me cover a few more slides and then we'll pause for discussion. The actual implementation of this, the amendments would be to the master plan document, which is a supporting document of the comprehensive plan. And then, but actually most of them would be in the code because the residential neighborhood code and the Frog Pond master plan, they're very integrated. They work together and that was the intended way that they were structured. Next slide, please. Beyond the counts, the housing form and the number of units under this method or that method, we need to think about the character of the community and some of the other aspects that Frog Pond West has master planned and guided. So open space is a very intentional part of Frog Pond West. There are 2 neighborhood parks. There are the natural areas of Beckman Creek and a few others. There's tree protection. And there's some requirements for tot lots and so on in small lot districts. All of that was the system to ensure that we get a very good green community along with the housing. So as we add housing, we need to be mindful of that. And so that's why we flagged this issue for you, that staff thinks that there should be the addition of intentional open space along with whichever option you would like to recommend. And the city does have open space concepts and policies and standards, as you well know. Probably the most direct to apply in this area would to utilize a 10% open space set aside per development for all of the rest of Frog Pond, so that we get small open spaces assured with each development to accommodate the additional housing. Next slide, please. And this may be my last one. What you might not be as familiar with is that there's an infrastructure funding strategy that was adopted for Frog Pond West. There were a number of key projects, the improvement of Beckman Road, the funding for the neighborhood park, some funding for trunk sewer, and through a review of a lot of different ways to fund that catalyst infrastructure, a infrastructure funding fee was adopted by the city, and it collects a per home fee currently, and we'd want to take a look at that and update it appropriately if we're adding the ability to do more homes. Does the fee go down? Do we structure it differently for different types of lots? We really haven't dipped in too far as to how that would be done, but did want to point it out as it's another implementation amendment that would want to be considered. Okay, I know that's a lot to drink in, so let's pause here. Dan, unless you have anything else to add, and I think it's appropriate to turn to commission questions, thoughts, comments.
Yeah, maybe, Kate, can we go back to the slide with kind of that highlights the three options? Okay. Yeah, and I think it is a good time to have discussion.
So, Chair, we'll turn over to you to guide discussion. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Chair Mesby, I've got some questions and some comments, shockingly.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I guess my first main question would be for Mr. Paula and Ms. Bateshell. What level of public feedback is envisioned for this process of revising a master plan with significant community input?
I would say it depends. It depends on the option. I mean, with option one, I mean, it's required by the state, and really, as we'll be explaining to the community, there's some things that we have to do. And so really we have to explain what kind of the difference between what we kind of have to do and what then should we focus on to make sure that that comes on the ground in Wilson in the best way possible. For example, on density, it's not really a question of whether or not the density is happening. It's a question of, okay, then what kind of design standards do we have to make sure that density that potential density works the best it can in existing and future neighborhoods. If we end up going and actually modifying the master plan and like moving the map around, then that would be something that would involve more public outreach, because we need to work with the neighbors and the property owners on where we're going to target any of those additional identified density or how we're going to move around the lines on the map.
Okay. I think it might be helpful to cover a little bit about what is scoped in terms of outreach, just so that the commission understands the type of outreach that's going to occur through this project, and also that there will be more outreach with East and South. And that way, depending on which of these options or how we're going to discuss these options might be more clear to the commission. If you could go into that a little bit.
Sure. So we are going to do specific stakeholder outreach to developers and neighbors. We're doing broader community outreach using with COVID, a lot of online tools like Let's Talk, and really having some targeted sessions where we'll present the history and kind of the questions that are out there and get their feedback. Again, a lot of that's going to be targeted on the citing and design standards. At the same time, we are working with, as I believe I mentioned before, an organization called Central Cultural of Washington County, who we have some funding from Metro that's supporting an effort to specifically reach out to the Latinx community and other historically marginalized communities of color. So, and we're also coordinating that with the diversity, equity, and inclusion process that's ongoing in the city. So all of that is happening alongside here. So certainly, this project's interesting in that there's some technical requirements that come from the state that this is what you get to do, city, essentially. And really the outreach on those components is about education, explaining what that means and what it doesn't mean. And then explaining really what then can the community have an impact on as part of this discussion, and focusing on that while making sure people are aware but also be able to target their input on those areas that we are able to really define as a local jurisdiction, which is primarily the citing and design standards.
Is that satisfactory, Commissioner Eberlein?
Yeah, I think that covers that general question. Do you want to go around with questions first, Commissioner or Chair Masbaugh, and then walk through preferences, or how do you want to do this?
Well, we are now trying to see if there are comments or questions first.
I have a question, a clarification, really.
Willard?
The way I'm interpreting this, option 1, that's the minimal change to be compliant. My belief here is that it's an option for the developers to add duplexes, and they could do so on any single-family lot. But they could opt not to do any, and in which case we would have the exact same density we have now. And so I guess does HB, I forget what it's called,
2001, yes.
Does it give any requirements for what the developers must do? Or is it just what needs to be in the plan and the planned densities?
It is the latter. That they don't. It doesn't require any actual production. HB 2001 looks at the zone capacity and really allowing it in the zoning code rather than actual any production strategies. Note that at the same time, House Bill 2003 was passed, which requires cities to come up with, to analyze, to do a housing needs analysis regularly, and also with that followed up with a housing production strategy, which can bring in different items to actually produce middle housing or different tools to do that. But HB 2001 is about zoning to allow it. So certainly under an option 1, you may end up if the market's not there, the developers in play don't want to do duplexes, there's nothing requiring them to. Duplexes are allowed in current, so it could be built out as the plan says now, which does include a requirement in certain sub-districts to have 10% duplexes, but that's just a side note. But they could develop it as it's planned now, and there'd be no requirement to actually add any duplex units. It's just something that the option is there if the market chooses to take advantage of it.
Yeah, so option 1 is the only option that could result in no additional middle housing, depending on what the market will bear at the time these are developed.
Yeah, I mean, option 3 conceptually could too. Option 3, though, would allow more row house development or townhouse development or row house development, which historically speaking, Wilsonville has been built more. So that would open up an option that may be more attractive to certain developers. Option 2, it increased the numbers. But again, there's some limitations, those land consuming requirements that we've talked about, that there's only so much land to squeeze in so many units. But those added units in option 2 could be additional single family homes and not necessarily middle housing.
And I would note that while this isn't relevant to Frog Pond West, it may be important for the commissioners to understand is that with House Bill 2001, there's different requirements for areas that had prior master plan approval versus areas that will be master planned. And so there's a significant difference in the density expectations for future master plan areas. And I think that is in part to get at that nexus of kind of what's a minimum requirement for development, right? Because it's like there's going to be a minimum requirement for which we have to plan for, but it's significantly higher. And inevitably that will, because of the interaction of different kind of rules and planning rules and maximum and minimum densities, that will push the developer to a higher minimum as well. So I just wanted to give you that context that when we look at east and south, we'll be looking at a number that's significant, that's different than 8 dwelling units per net acre.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question, Commissioner Willard?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Greenfield?
I must be missing something here, but what I'm missing is a difference between option 1 and what the state is requiring anyway. That's question 1. I have another question to follow.
I'll jump in on that. Commissioner, you're correct, is that option 1 is what the state minimally requires.
So it's really not an option.
True. I mean, it's, as compared to the other ones, if you made that choice, you wouldn't be doing one of the others.
Right, okay. Then the second question is, do we have, I'll say, do we have assumptions, or can we make assumptions about what developers are likely to do, given their permission to do this kind of housing? Are there models for this from other experiences, other venues?
There has been some study to date that has been done during the state rulemaking process. And to summarize a much more complicated analysis that was done, very simply, it pointed towards that of all the array of different middle housing types, attached townhomes were the ones that were the most familiar and the most likely to be developed. And I'm kind of generalizing from a study that was done. Specific to Wilsonville and what could happen in Frog Pond West, we have not done work yet to test feasibility and try and put some facts around the answer to your question. We do have 2 things that can help us. One is the outreach process that Dan mentioned, which our first component of which will come up in February. We'll be sitting down with the developers that have already been working in Frog Pond, and we're hoping to meet with others that build this type of housing to get their answer to your question. And then we have Echo Northwest on the team that could actually put some quantitative analysis to try and estimate return on investment and some other kinds of metrics for us that would help. So that's a long way of saying we don't know yet, but we do have some tools available as we move through the process in the coming months.
It was pretty much a wild guess that if we did option 1, we would meet the state's goal of 8 per acre.
That's right. We would be complying with the state requirements in a zoning code sense, but on the ground when things get built at this point, we don't know whether that would occur a little bit or a lot or something in between.
Joe, can I just clarify that point really quickly? This is Kate. I'll turn my camera on. So the state requires that the city allow 8 dwelling units per acre. It doesn't require that 8 dwelling units per acre actually be built. So just by allowing the 8 dwelling units per acre, the city would be complying with the state rules.
Thank you.
Thanks for that clarification, because a moment ago, Commissioner Greenfield, you said, so option 1 isn't really an option, and that statement puzzled me. And so what I just heard Ms. Rogers say is option 1 is an option. So I appreciate that clarification.
Well, the requirement, as I understand it, is that we allow it, we permit it.
Right.
And the assumption in option 1 is that if we permitted enough takers there would be enough takers to bring our, there is no more requirement than that we permitted. And if we permitted, we probably will get to, the assumption is we probably will get to the 8 per acre level. but there's no guarantee of that, and there's no requirement of that. The only requirement is that we permit it.
Right. And maybe I'll just add one more level of this conversation. All of these statements are true relative to what the state is requiring Wilsonville to do minimally. You could choose to require more duplexes or more particular housing forms or increase your minimum densities as a matter of a change to Frog Pond West to try and get more towards the guarantee end of the spectrum. I'm just putting that out there as something that could be done, but these options have been crafted to follow the logic line of providing the potential for this housing.
And I should bring us around to the subject of the equitable housing strategy, which we are bound, I think, by City Council to take account of in this planning. And so that we should be, in keeping with that, that strategy, we should be doing whatever we can to promote the development of at least these duplexes in Frog Pond West. That is to help the developers decide to do that.
Thank you. Commissioner Woods?
Yeah, point of clarification on the option one. If we go with that, it says that the density allowance would increase by about 80 to 90%, which seems to be the least amount, certainly less than option two. So my question is then, if we look at option one, potentially the number of homes would not be as many as, say, if we chose option two. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That's our estimate.
I also want to note here, just to kind of play it out over time, is regardless of what we do, once it's developed, what we're talking about here is initial development. Once it's developed, then all middle housing types are allowed on redevelopment. But the assumption is that once you build a new neighborhood, it's not going to be redeveloped for quite some time. But once anything's built, and this applies throughout the city in any of these master plans or existing development, redevelopment could be from the whole menu of options. So as we're talking about this, I want to be clear that we're talking about initial build out.
Is there a metric for that to determine when initial build out is finished?
So it's just any vacant lot is built. So, right? So if there's a unbuilt subdivision lot that a house gets built on it, you're not going to tear it down next year and build a duplex. Right? So that's the kind of assumption we're making there, and has been made throughout the process, both on the local and state level.
So essentially, Commissioner Greenfield, we have, 4 subdivision approvals in Frog Pond West, I think, or is it 3? I have so many numbers in my head.
5 total.
Those have essentially been developed or are developing according to their development plan. The next proposals we receive will do that in accordance with what we adopt related to these master plan provisions. Once all of those are complete, they're all developed, fast forward 10, 20 years in the future, any one of those lots, then if a developer came in or a single property owner came in and was interested in redevelopment to, say, change their single family home into a duplex or a triplex, then they would come in and they would, the development code provisions that would apply to them would be the ones that apply everywhere in the city, regardless of the initial master plan build out and code language. And so that would be allowed. So even in an area such as Frog Pond West, where we currently maybe would be only allowing single family detached in specific sub-districts, those in the future could redevelop according to House Bill 2001 into other middle housing types.
Thank you. Commissioner Woods, are you done?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Commissioner Gallagher?
I just want to ask a question about what was just said. So in other words, considering, say we would recommend option one, it wouldn't apply right now to what is being built right now? It would apply to the future? Because it isn't all developed. Some of it is already in place, but much of it isn't.
So, right. So what the options you're looking at now would apply now. So these are the things that would apply as the master plan area, as Frog Pond West builds out. Then once it builds out, so let's say we pick option one just because that one's okay bigger, and we say that duplexes are allowed on every lot, and that gets us to the correct density with the state, and also keeps maybe generally with the master plan. We go with option one.
Okay.
For whatever reason, we're allowing duplexes. Let's say as the master plan area develops, people come in, we have a subdivision plan, we approve a 50-lot subdivision. Let's say 4 of them take advantage of the duplex. The rest are single family. So we would approve that because they're allowed to have a duplex. The rest is single family detached. One of those lots could not, however, propose a 4-plex if we went with option one because we're not allowing those additional middle housing types. And so at construction of the master plan, we would still essentially keep it at approximately the same density it was originally approved for. However, fast forward 20 years or 10 years or whatever it is for the life cycle of that property owner, somebody could come in and look to redevelop their property with the increased other middle housing types that House Bill 2001 allows, which includes triplex, 4-plex, cottage housing. If they meet the right site design standards and lot size, they could potentially redevelop into other middle housing types because that's the basis for all areas of all cities that aren't essentially at the edge of an urban growth boundary going through a master plan. They're the ones that apply to everywhere that redevelops.
That's only after initial build out, is that correct?
Correct.
Correct.
So, Ms. Batesdale, would that mean that the existing approved development, so we've got 3 of them happening right now, could they change their development plans and put more townhouses in once this went through?
So they would, go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
He directed your question to you, but so if you want, you can go ahead, Branda.
I was just going to say that current approvals, they have their current approvals for what they're allowed to build. If they wanted to propose something different, they'd have to go through the Development Review Board process to propose something different. And the proposal for what could be different would be based on the option that you choose. Got it. And when that becomes effective in our code.
Okay. That was really kind of where my question was coming from. Thank you.
Okay. It's very layered, right? Because it's the current master plan development, and that's different based on who's already in the door versus who's not in the door.
Well, and it also was
big. And then also once all of that is built, then there's a whole nother kind of set of rules that apply.
And the homeowners that are there right now that have already moved in to this brand new development, they don't have any control over what gets decided. In other words, once this goes through, that applies to them whether or not that's what they bought into originally. Correct?
The participation that they would be allowed would be the one through essentially this process where we're going through and making decisions about modifying policy. Some of that, as we've covered tonight, is required by state law. And then there's also some of it where we have additional leeway where we can make policy decisions. And so the community could voice they have a voice in this process. We have both an outreach plan, and then also this process with you is open to the public.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Jasinski, you have not said anything.
Well, my questions are more for infrastructure, so I didn't know if we were ready to go there yet. My question is, it seems like with option 1 and 2, we maybe already have a lot of that infrastructure in place that we can service whatever way we go with the sub-districts or just having some duplexes. But with the option 3, let's say somebody goes in and wants to put in a bunch of quadplexes or triplexes, are we going to have the infrastructure for that? Or if not, what's kind of the process for changing the infrastructure and getting it to where it needs to be?
Sure. So
I can.
Go ahead, Joe.
Go ahead, Dan.
No, go ahead, Joe.
It's a process of really studying the capacities of the infrastructure that's already put in. That's one step that needs to be done. And then, and I'm describing that in terms of water and sewer and stormwater. I think there is a traffic impact analysis side to this as well that should be done. And so looking at existing capacities and headroom, so to speak, within the systems that have been planned to date to inform the city's decision about amendment of the code. So that's what I wanted to add.
That answer your question?
Yeah, I think kind of. I'm just concerned if, we get several, I don't know what the likelihood of this is, but if we get a ton of quadplexes in there, how different it's going to have, how much money that's going to cost the city, and how that's going to have to be changed in a major way if that ends up happening, which I don't know if it will, but.
Yeah, so what we will do, part of that, we are looking at infrastructure as part of this project. And to inform, we have 20-year outlook infrastructure plans for all of our major infrastructure. So they look at the capacity and development kind of market projections to make a conservative but realistic estimate of the infrastructure needs. And this is similar to, and they'll continue to do that. This will change some of that math that we look at as we update our infrastructure master plans, but that process exists and will continue to happen. And as part of this project, we're getting some information that will feed into the updates of those plans. And in that is also looking at how you're going to finance it. So.
Thank you.
I think in Mr. Dill's presentation, he noted that because we have an infrastructure funding fee in Frog Pond West, if we do change the unit counts, that could change the per door cost. If we're looking at increasing the option for more units, and we do this analysis, if we see that there's other infrastructure improvements that might be needed, then we can either have that inform the policy decision that's being made, and or use that in terms of reassessing that infrastructure fee, and whether the infrastructure improvements are related to those framework projects that are part of that fee or not. So there is that opportunity to do that analysis.
Okay.
Commissioner Greenfield, you wanted to say something?
I'm wondering if well, first, in the construction of Frog Pond West already, how much headroom is built in to our water and sewer? Could it handle the worst case? Well, could it handle the extreme case of doubling the number of units?
It needs to be studied. We don't have that answer yet. So we've flagged the same question One additional part of that is that the infrastructure systems, water and sewer in particular, for Frog Pond West were designed in concert with looking ahead to accommodating Frog Pond East and South. And so there's a slightly larger spatial area of consideration to answer that.
Large trunk lines.
Yeah.
Could it be, could we be looking at requiring, if a project does exceed the capacity, would we be imposing a fee on those, on whatever the project is that does that, that does exceed it?
We don't have.
Can the new pay the freight?
We don't have an answer to that. That's within the scope of this and Frog Pond East and South to really look at that. That is a key question that is in the scope to explore. But I don't know that we'll have the answer soon. But certainly that you just have to apply it equally across different housing types and really see what makes sense for different housing types. So there's a lot of things to consider, but certainly looking at the best way to fund it and make sure that development is paying for itself is something that is a policy. Concurrency and development paying for itself is likely a policy that will go forward unless we're directed otherwise by council to, as part of any initiative to really incentivize certain types of housing.
And I would note that in the minimum compliance for House Bill 2001, there is the allowance of all of these to be allowed in redevelopment areas. There is a provision if there is about infrastructure that got revised until the last minute at the last hearing. So I'm positive I don't recollect it perfectly. But it allowed for time to be able to do an assessment on infrastructure with proposal to sort of improve that. I would say that that should really be looked at within that minimum compliance redevelopment. When we're looking at a master plan area, we want to be setting provisions during the master plan that we feel our infrastructure is sufficient to handle and that we as a city feel comfortable with. So I think we need to do that analysis. It's already in the scope. We can get you more information, but I wouldn't want to rely on a provision of that sort, I think, when we're master planning from the beginning, especially since redevelopment will allow these housing types over time as well.
So, and I would add, in terms of thinking about these options, I would assume that the city has a way to figure out the funding for any of these options in terms of supporting it with infrastructure. But we will do further analysis of that.
Before we leave this subject, to make just a quick point, that there was a great deal of community involvement, shall we say, in the density and lot size considerations we made in Master Planning West. And ultimately, we ended up with what I would regard as a compromise. Not one that I especially favored, but it was clearly a response to the community input. And if we should go so far as option 3, it would throw that entire discussion, that entire community discussion, wide open. And I don't know how that would even play out, but I do want to caution us that if we went for option 3, we should be prepared for a much more major community input process than we would have with either option 1 or 2.
Thank you. And that's one of why I've had my hand up, because Option 3, when we look at that, I mean, that exempts the duplexes, triplexes, quads, and cottage clusters from that maximum density calculation. And I mean, if I read this correctly, that would be 4 times what is stated to bring it up to a capacity of 25 units per acre. So going along with what Jerry has just mentioned, I think that would be a major issue. And so I just bring that up, and I'm glad Jerry did bring that up, because I wanted to bring that up as well, because it seems to be, I don't know, that's a lot for option 3, and that 25 units per acre seems really, really dense.
I think even option 1 is going to raise some eyebrows, but we have the absolute fallback that it's required of us. Option 2, not so required, although it's still pretty much in line with the requirements. But option 3 throws the thing quite open, and it's like starting over again in our zoning of that whole west development. So in our discussions about equitable housing strategy, and if I remember correctly, when we were discussing some of the changes that we did last year, or we talked about last year, because of the changes to the state law, we and the city council, I thought I heard, decided that we are going to do what's right instead of just meet the letter of the law. Option 1 meets the letter of the law. One of the shortcomings to me as a planner and a designer of option 1 is that it opens all of the available lots to a duplex if the developer or owner wants to do that, where you're not really designing for it, in other words, as a site design. Option 2 allows the city to look at the existing undeveloped areas and find where duplexes would make sense and would work best in the design of that whole development. It would seem to me, if I were living in that neighborhood, that option 2 would actually be a more thoughtful approach towards increasing density, as opposed to just a free-for-all, scattershot kind of increase in density. So that is what option 2 has going for it. Option 3, I agree, is completely opening up the whole thing to a reconsideration, and I think those who invested in single-family housing in that neighborhood would likely not be particularly open to that, because that's not how they chose their purchase to begin with. So I think all of these require outreach, and I agree with Jerry and Aaron that option 3 would require a major outreach for redoing that whole thing. It's a complete rediscussion of the design of that neighborhood.
Okay, Commissioner.
Yeah, and I would say that, from my perspective, being on the task force with Jerry as we worked on putting together the Frog Pond, in my mind, equitable housing was not a topic of discussion throughout that. It was very much we have too many apartments and we need more large lots. And that's really where the conversation was the entire process. And so for me, option 3 really is a test of the city's commitment to equitable housing. It is technically feasible to do that in the neighborhood. It's a question of, does the city government and the citizens have the will to make it happen?
I wanted to add on option 2, Commissioner Mesbah, just to make certain. So option 2 specifies where some density goes, but it still still have to allow duplexes on every lot in option 2 as well.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that clarification.
The last final point I'll make is because we still have Frog Pond East and South to adhere to the new master plan rules of the new law from the state. I think if we were fully built out everywhere, and this was the last remaining build out or the last current build out, our response would be one thing. But since we do have additional build out in this area, our response can be a little bit more conservative as well.
So that brings up an interesting question. The achievement of 8 units per acre doesn't allow you to join the Frog Pond West neighborhood with, I don't know, South or East or whatever, and create a bigger neighborhood, does it? You have to look at this as is. You don't have the option of expanding the neighborhood boundaries?
So, I mean, the standards from the state are quite different for existing master plans. So just to give you a flavor, while there's still debate and this may change over time because the state's still doing studies, then they kind of left it as an open question. Right now, the adopted rules point to us planning infrastructure for 20 units an acre in Frog Pond East and South. Not saying that that has to get built, but that we are obligated to plan for 20 units an acre in terms of infrastructure. So, yeah, I mean, you're talking quite a bit. So the fact that the requirements are substantially different, you probably wouldn't lend you to combining it. I mean, still you're going to have some urban design components and wayfinding things are going to, and design elements are going to make the the 3 neighborhoods mesh together, but the density requirements are quite a bit different.
What we were doing originally was really an area plan that did combine all 3 areas.
Correct.
And but each one of the areas has its own master plan, as I understand it. Certainly, West had its own master plan. And what I gather is that the state requirement applies to master plan specifically. Is that right?
That is correct. So because Frog Pond West has an adopted master plan, it has different provisions. East and South, because there is not an existing master plan, there's only an area plan, then the provisions for new master planning apply to East and South. To get at Commissioner Mesbau's question, if we were to simply change the boundaries of West to encompass East and South, I believe we would still be, based on the way that it's written, and I'd have to go back and reread it and potentially ask legal counsel for their interpretation, but my base interpretation of going through the process is because East and South never had a master plan, then it would still apply that new density to those areas at a minimum, and it might even then add that density to West.
It's unfortunate that we couldn't have done at least West and East together, but the compromise that I referred to was specifically to put on the higher density planning to East in order to allow for the community's systems on smaller lots, on larger lot sizes in West, less density in West. In order to meet that demand, we agreed that we would consider multifamily and other, we aren't using the terminology of middle housing, but middle housing and multifamily housing in West, I mean in East and South. that was the compromise that allowed us to get West planned as we did. Now we're changing the terms of that compromise to increase the density in West in a way that wouldn't have been acceptable when we originally master planned it. This bothers me. I didn't like the compromise. I wanted more density in West at the time, but that's the way that it shook out in that community outreach process. Now we're faced with the requirement to do more density in West and more density in East. I don't have any problem with the higher density in East, although I always thought that higher density ought to be where West is. That didn't happen. But I think that there's a lot of community discussion to be done here. And we also need to make sure that in our outreach that the message gets out that we are under, first of all, requirements from the state and Metro, or Metro through the state, really, I think it is. We have those requirements, and we have the commitment that the council has made through the task force report on equitable housing to take account of that in a way that we weren't taking account of it in planning on West, so that we really must take account of it in our planning of South and East. If we can do some mitigation in West to take better account of equitability, we need to do that with a lot of persuasion of the community in our outreach.
Thank you. Are we ready to move on?
Yeah, did we want to go through and just, are any of the commissioners ready to, outside of discussion, to kind of give a preferred option, or any other feedback directly on this that we can forward to the council?
Do you want one by one preferences? How do you want that, Dan?
Yeah, I'd be interested in just, I'd like to hear if commissioners are comfortable with their preference, and then just a brief reason why, so we can kind of understand that as we continue to refine this.
Okay. Jerry, you want to go first?
All right. I'm in favor of option 2, but I'd like to see it to include intention to increase the number of units in the middle and the middle density and low density neighborhoods, and leave the small lot size neighborhood sub-districts as they are.
Thank you. Aaron?
It's of course allowing duplex.
Commissioner Woods.
Okay. I like option 2. I think option 2, even though it is in line somewhat with option 1 with the minimum density, of the 8, I think when I look at this, that even though the city wouldn't have to allow, any more than duplexes for the middle housing, I think this, for me anyway, option 2 would be the best way to go when I look at this overall. So option 2 for me, I like.
Thank you. Commissioner Willard.
My last preference is option 3. Beginning this discussion, I was leaning towards option 1, allowing Frog Pond East and South to, under the new master plan rules from HB 2001, to provide the density and the middle housing that we asked for. But with the context that Commissioner Greenfield gave about the task force and some of the compromises that were made there, and I'm leaning more towards option 2, so I'm kind of in between those.
Thank you. Commissioner Trzynski.
I am also for option 2. I think it would kind of keep the original intent of the neighborhood somewhat intact. And for the people that have already purchased their homes in there, like you said, Chair Mesbah, it would be a little more palatable than, for sure, than with going with option 3.
Thank you. Commissioner Gallagher.
Well, option 3 to me is a no. I tend to favor option 2 also. The only thing I haven't heard discussed that I'm always going to be concerned about, and that is green space and tree preservation. I haven't heard anything about it, but it seems to me in option 2 there might be more control over that than there would be in option 1. So option 2. I feel like if I pick the right door, there's going to be a prize.
Commissioner Pepperline.
I'll take door number 2.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so in my mind, option 2 is the minimum standard that we should be aiming for. You know, as I see it, and this is figuratively in my backyard, but almost literally in my backyard as I'm across the street from this development. If the city is serious about equitable housing and serious about having a housing stock that can meet the needs of all of the residents, then option 3 should be more seriously investigated. You know, I would be willing to accept option 2, but I think if the city is really serious about equitable housing, then we should be focusing more of our effort on option 3. Yes, I acknowledge as part of the Frog Pond task force, option 3 was not what we wanted for Frog Pond West as a whole. I personally am in line with Commissioner Greenfield and wanted a more distributed allocation of the density throughout the entire Frog Pond development. But this gives us an option to have that conversation again in a different lens. I mean, we're 3 years later, and a lot has happened since this was accepted. A lot has happened in the world. I think it's a reasonable time to have that conversation with the city and its residents again.
Thank you. I see option 1 only as meeting the letter of the law, and not having heard anything about what the market preference is, not knowing what the market preference is in that neighborhood. I'm not convinced that duplexes are going to be built. I think that place is going to be mostly single family. I'm open to seeing market analysis that disabuses me of that impression. Option 2 is, to me, the minimum we should be doing as a city. I agree with Commissioner Eberlein that option 3, if we are serious about equity and inclusion, should be considered. This kind of brings up the whole idea of needing a living, ongoing efforts by the city in the form of some commission, standing commission, on inclusion and equity, to inform and educate and build consensus around inclusion and equity. I don't believe we can have inclusion and equity by forcing it, because you're just alienating people who don't understand why it's being forced on them if they don't really understand it and embrace it. And maybe I'm naive thinking that within a few years we may be able to get to a critical mass of embracing equity, but without having tried it earnestly for some time, I'm not going to give up on it. And I think jumping to option 3 at this time, I'm not sure is realistic. Again, I'm open to being disabused of that. I would love to see a hue and a cry from 99% of the residents of the city that says, oh, we should have option 3, of course. And if that happens, then I will be glad. I just think that that is too much of a shock for a built neighborhood. So I was going to ask how many lots have been built, how much of that Frog Pond West has been built and how much remains. That is, I don't recall having seen that information.
Yeah, so on that, I don't have exact numbers. It's a neighborhood of 100 lots that have actually been built. 75 to 100 is the working number I have. I haven't looked through the permit data to double check, but somewhere in that ballpark.
So what percentage of the neighborhood is that?
That's primarily, was known as Morgan Farm. So they're built by Pailish next to the creek, and then, so all on the southern end, and then the Street of Dreams and homes just north of that. But the greatest number is the Pailish over there on the very south, in the south west corner.
Is that a quarter of the neighborhood? Is that half the neighborhood?
No, there's about 500 remaining.
Yeah, about 500 remaining.
What is it? Maybe less than that.
Actually, built or the number permitted?
That's the number built, because the idea is if a lot's platted, that you could still come and, after this, granted that there'll be houses, quite a few houses built between today and when the city adopts us in, let's say, the fall or so. But once it's adopted and goes into effect, any vacant lot in those existing subdivisions could potentially be changed to whatever is allowed, because they just need to do a building permit.
So we're looking at the opportunity to influence 3/4 of the development by the time this is all said and done, by the decisions that we make here.
I was asking for that information because, if more than half had already been developed, then the horse is out the barn. But I guess that much isn't developed. So I don't know. I leave the door open to option 3 being realistic. I take back that it is unrealistic.
I would too.
But I think my preference is option 2.
Hybrid is 2 and 3. I think it's possible to devise a hybrid of it.
Okay.
So real quick before we move on, did we get from, I think that was everyone, right, Chair?
That was everyone.
Okay, so I've heard some comments early on, and when we talk about option 2 and increasing the number of units, just wanted to be clear, is the commission thinking that the increase should be middle housing units, or the increase could be any type of unit? Any thoughts on that?
Why are we doing it if not for middle housing?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
I think what Dan is asking is, are you limiting yourself to duplexes, or are you open to quads, triplexes, and all the rest of the middle housing range?
Hybrid, it does open us to more than duplexes. I don't know that I would go all the way to quadplexes and cluster houses, but possibly that.
Okay, so...
Just quickly interject, I'm sorry, commissioners. I think the question, and Mr. Pauly can confirm, but I think the clarification is, because the state only requires in the master plan areas a minimum density, is that we could increase the number of units in different sub-districts, but not make a distinction on what those units need to look like. So we would increase to greater than 8 dwelling units in particular areas where we'd like to see more density. And we could allow that as whatever form, whether it's single family or a middle housing type, of the middle housing types that we add to the Frog Pond West area plan or master plan. I think the question that Mr. Pauly is asking is if we want the increase in units or that additional density beyond what's originally in the plan, if we're wanting to ensure or require that that's middle housing as opposed to just additional units. Is that the question, Mr. Pauly?
Yes, if the commissioners want it to be middle housing versus the potentially of all the added units being single family instead.
Would be my vote.
Yeah, that would be my vote too.
Sorry, Commissioner Greenfield was, I didn't hear what your votes were.
the housing that we're talking about should be middle housing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, and open it up so that we have all the middle housing types.
It's not required of us, but this is an opportunity that we might avail ourselves of.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm in agreement with that, middle housing for me as well.
Thank you for that clarification. I think this is good information that will allow us to move forward, present to council, and continue to refine this. Really appreciate the commission's time and thought on this tonight. So, Kate, actually, just real quick, anything else on landscaping or infrastructure before we move on to our other items that we want to talk about tonight? Okay. Kate, if you want to go ahead and move forward to, I think it's Villebois next, right? And I believe you're going to lead that one.
That is right. And this discussion should be a lot more straightforward, hopefully, because Villebois has already mostly been built out. So we're not talking about major changes, at least in the initial build out of this master plan area. So just a quick recap of the background of the Villebois Village master plan area. So this was first adopted in 2003. It's been amended several times since then, but it is a roughly 480 acre area on the west side of Wilsonville. It's envisioned as and built out to be a mixed-use community with a village center with commercial uses and a lot of different housing types permitted in the neighborhood areas, including a wide range of middle housing types, duplexes, row houses, and as cluster housing as well as multifamily housing. So. And that's the way it was planned, and that's the way it's mostly been built out to date. I'm not sure exactly what percentage has been built out, but from what I've heard, it's largely built out.
Upwards of 80%.
80%, thank you. So, so the same kind of special provisions for existing master plan communities that we were talking about for Frog Pond West would also apply to Villebois. But the sort of calculation is a little more straightforward just because the density already kind of exceeds that 8 dwelling unit per acre threshold that would qualify the area to meet these alternative standards. So that's kind of less of a question. And because it's largely already built out, really what's left for the remaining areas to sort of meet the minimum standards for House Bill 2001 is that for any of the lots that are planned for single family development, those just need to permit a duplex. And that's the proposed approach, is just to make that kind of simple change. And it's a relatively small amendment that's needed to the text of the master plan and then to the implementing development code text, which is the village zone. So that's part for the initial build out. And as we talked about for Frog Pond West, once the area is already built out, all the lots are developed, then this area becomes essentially like any other neighborhood in Wilsonville, where the city will need to permit all middle housing types, triplexes, townhouses, et cetera, if those lots are to redevelop or if someone wants to, do infill development to split a lot, say, and add units that way. So that's kind of the approach for Villebois. It's, as I said, more straightforward. And I should note that, redevelopment, infill development is pretty unlikely to happen for quite some time. It's already been built out at a pretty relatively high density compared to other, single family neighborhoods in Wilsonville. So not likely to see a lot of changes as a result of these new provisions. So that's all I have for that. Are there any questions or comments on that?
I would add, because of that, we're not really worried about infrastructure out here either. So, just like the rest of the city, we're going to look at what's the capacity is, how much future redevelopment could happen before things are triggered, but not the level of concern like there is for Frog Pond at this point on infrastructure.
Any comments or questions? Moving on.
Okay. So then, as part of the master plan, what we call the master plan audit, we also looked at the Old Town Neighborhood Plan, which is not the same as the other master plans. It's not actually a legislative master plan. It doesn't have the same kind of legal force that the other plans do. It's really kind of a more of a policy guiding document. So it's not necessary to amend it to comply with House Bill 2001, but you know, it's sort of a good idea to do to sort of update the policies in recognition of changing sort of legislative environment and things like that. And beyond 2001, there's been other state level legislation that's affected accessory dwelling unit requirements and things like that. So it's sort of a good idea to update some of those policy recommendations to reflect that. And then also to reflect the city's sort of new focus on equitable housing. So the Old Town neighborhood was, I'm sure you're all very familiar with it, but it's located along Boonesbury Road, just north of the river. It's the oldest neighborhood in the city, but it's developed with kind of a range of architectural styles over the years. So this plan was adopted in 2011 by resolution rather than by ordinance. And so I kind of mentioned this, but for the purpose of auditing the document, we really focused on potential updates to the recommended policies and actions related to land use, and to some of the sort of references to supporting materials and references to state laws and things like that.
And I would add that certainly in our outreach plan, the Old Town neighborhood is a stakeholder group that will do specific work with on this, as well as those potential rezoning RAH issues that we talked about last time.
Right. Yes. Because this is an area that, you know, could potentially see some infill development or redevelopment as a result of allowing middle housing types. So that's a good point. It is a focus of the project, just the plan itself doesn't necessarily need a lot of changes to reflect that. So I mentioned some of the changes to references to state and metro region regulations. So in terms of the comp plan recommendations, there's just been some sort of recent development plans and changes to specific properties that are mentioned in the comprehensive plan recommendations in the Old Town plan, and those really just need to be updated to kind of reflect those changes. And then for the zoning recommendations, the Old Town plan originally recommended rezoning those residential agricultural holding zone, or RAH lots, as a new Old Town residential zone, which would be sort of modeled on the residential R zone, which exists elsewhere in the city. And that wasn't implemented. But as we talked about in our last meeting on middle housing, we talked about different options for encouraging middle housing in this area and offering more housing choices by potentially rezoning those RAH zone lots, the small lots that wouldn't qualify for a planned development, potentially rezoning those either through a legislative rezoning process, or we presented some other options for conditional rezoning, which would require the property owner's approval. So I don't know if we want to open that discussion back up again, but basically whatever the city ends up deciding which option they choose to go with, that will need to be reflected in this plan, or should be reflected in this plan. So those are really the key changes that are needed for this plan. Are there any questions about that?
Yeah, the only question I have, as we all know, the Old Town neighborhood has a character to it, I'll say. And in this rezoning, in order to preserve that character, since this is our oldest neighborhood in the city, how is the city looking at that to ensure that any homes that are built in here don't look, I'll say, odd, or don't fit the area look. Is that being taken into consideration?
Before you answer that, Commissioner Willard, could you please take the chair for 5 minutes?
Of course.
Thank you.
And I would answer that.
Sure.
So Old Town does have the existing Old Town single-family design standards that apply to single-family homes. And there probably need to be some tweaks to acknowledge that they apply to middle housing as well. But some of that scale and requirements, the state does allow us to still apply those as long as we apply them to uniformly to single-family and middle housing. So we do intend to continue to use those. We'll have to change it from single-family design standards to residential design standards, but intend to primarily still keep that type of regulation in Old Town that would guide this development.
Great. Thank you.
And also to clarify, if you were to develop anything other than a single-family detached house, which you can currently do in the RAH zone, you would still have to rezone property to go through the development process. So this wouldn't necessarily change what zoning would end up being applied to your property. It would just, it might do that rezoning ahead of time. That would make that process of development much easier. So you wouldn't have to go through that extra step of having to do a rezone.
And it's always awkward on those to say, you know, we're going through this public process, but you don't really, but there's only one option. That's kind of an awkward conversation to have with a neighborhood is, yes, we want your feedback, but really there's only one option, right? So that's why making the process simpler and having the conversation of standards that everyone can agree upon now, knowing that then any property owner or developer can come in the future and just follow those and pull a building permit.
Any other thoughts or questions? Okay. So just really quickly, for citing and design standards, that's kind of the phase we're in the project right now, and that's really being led by Sarah Architects. They're developing the middle housing citing and design standards, and they did a memo on background research just to really ground the development of those standards in best practices and in the equitable housing strategic plan and the city's goals and actions related to equitable housing. So that memo really just kind of summarized the findings and how that might influence the process of developing these new standards or amending the existing standards. So we don't have any specific information to present to you tonight on that topic, but if you all had a chance to read the memo and have any questions or feedback on that, we'd be happy to try to field those. But we will come back at the next session with a lot more to talk about related to citing and design.
Questions, comments?
It seems to me that how citing is handled in the undeveloped part of Frog Pond West and beyond will have a great deal to do with how many housing types are feasible on a given lot. So if in fact we are trying to squeeze in 3 units on even 2 units on a small lot, that could be precluded apparently or legally by restrictive citing requirements. Clearly, the citing requirements, citing maximum minimums are very germane to the overall density that we can handle in an area.
Barry, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Am I the only one?
No, you're not the only one. Barry, did you put something over the top of your mic or something?
I probably just did, yes.
Yeah.
That's much better. There it is.
Thank you.
I had a notebook. I set it on my keyboard. What I was saying is that siting requirements that we have are quite germane to how much density we can squeeze into a given area. So this is a very important question, and it has very much to do with how the developers actually would respond to their permit to the allowances. That is to the allowed densities.
It's a really good point, and I think part of what Sarah Architects and what we will be looking at is, how, so at minimum, per the state's rules, the city generally has to apply the same standards that apply to single-family detached housing, to middle housing. But what we want to look at is whether some of those siting standards might make it so that no middle housing could possibly be built because the setbacks would be way too huge or the lot coverage would be much too small, too constrained. So that's part of the consideration. But also part of the consideration is how can siting and design standards be used to kind of to make the implementation of middle housing a little more palatable, to make it kind of ease those transitions between single family and middle housing potentially. So those are all really important considerations. And I think you're right that it will be really important to think about how Frog Pond West could potentially be built out in terms of density and how that corresponds to the siting standards. So yes, totally agree.
Any other comments?
Chair Messbaum, my only comment would be around the standards. And, I know the city has done a great job to date of making sure that we've got good design standards and we have a high quality product for any housing type that we build. And I think we just need to make sure that we continue that with middle housing and make sure that we allow for the middle housing, but maintain that quality of the design and the aesthetics that we see throughout our neighborhoods.
Thank you. Any other ones? Very good. Moving on.
Okay. I think I'm going to pass it back to Mr. Pauly.
Yes, thank you. So I think this will be a fairly short discussion, but wanted to revisit some of the key things we talked about outside of Old Town in November and kind of report back on additional research we've done and some concepts that we've come up with to potentially on the attached versus detached, and then on the land divisions, just kind of report more on that. So on the land division, first of all, on the attached versus detached, kind of in summary, generally there was support of the flexibility. There was some concern that if you allow detached, then you're just getting more single family. You're not really getting middle housing, which is understood. So one concept would be to still allow the flexibility of the detached, but don't call it a duplex. So really come up, the idea we had is to expand the definition of cluster housing. So essentially you have 2-unit, 3-unit, 4-unit cluster housing, and then you have cottage cluster, which is where it's actually formed around a courtyard. So I think just kind of that idea of clustering multiple units on a lot kind of gets at what this detached duplex or triplex is, better than calling it a duplex or triplex, which traditionally people understand as attached units. So that's kind of where the recommendation based on the feedback would be to go there. I just want to confirm and get additional feedback from the commissioners if we heard you correctly, if that's the direction. Sounds like a direction that is supportive of previous feedback that we can take forward to council and get their feedback on. And before we talk about that, in terms of land divisions, we talked kind of jokingly last time how it's kind of hard to write the code, and, thank you for having a lot of faith in me and the ability to write residential code. I know you guys have had to read way too much that I've written over the years. But really, as I continue to look at this, it's becoming more a question of what, is it too difficult, or it's more a question, is it feasible at all? And really that goes around this key question is that both locally, and we can probably overcome locally, but on the state level, as you're applying all these different residential standards, the definition of all these different unit types, like single family versus townhouse versus duplex, is all based on how many units are on a lot. So then if you create multiple lots, when you create a new lot, you change the definition of the unit that's on it, which then becomes kind of this cyclical thing that just explodes on itself, essentially. So there are, I know the state, I've seen some initial ideas that are still being developed. A number of groups are working on coming up with some concepts that the legislature may adopt. But I don't know where that's going to go or if they will effectively address this issue of the definitions. But because the definitions are difficulties and these potential changes to state law around this, it seems like making the change right now may not be ripe, and maybe better to table this for now. But really what we're looking for then in terms of land divisions is confirmation of, first of all, the level of interest and the priority of this topic for the commission in recommending to city council, and if there is commission support to deferring it to a later time for the reasons stated. Also would again point out that when you combine the detached with the ability, if you were to combine kind of the detached idea with the ability to divide land, then you may end up, you get that issue where essentially you're creating smaller lot single family. And so there'd have to be some creativity of okay, maybe that's okay to divide a backyard cottage in an existing development, but it's not okay to build a bunch of detached duplexes that are then subdivided in a new development. So those are all issues that would need to be addressed down the road, but at this point recommend tabling that, and while confirming that that is something that the commission wants to continue to pursue. So with that, open to questions on comments on either of those topics.
Confirmation first, I suppose. Is this?
So do we want to take it
with the detached versus attached?
Yeah, let's focus on that first.
It looks like, given, once you resolve the other issues that you brought up that need to be defined, and for my point of view, should I call on people, Jerry?
Well, I'm not at all clear about how it's possible to talk about duplexes if the land is, the dwelling is on is a separate lot, that it's property.
So maybe it's useful again to let's first talk about this idea of attached versus detached, assuming that there's no land divisions, and see if kind of that concept makes sense minus the land division part of the equation, and then that may be helpful.
Are there examples in Villebois of this kind of this kind of division?
Of like 2 units on one lot like this? No.
Right.
Mr. Pauly, what you're really looking for is, if I recall correctly from our last meeting, our conversations were aligned around some of the confusion of having a detached plex of any quantity.
Right.
So the question here is the commission okay with the idea of revised language around cluster houses to replace that idea of a detached plex? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And then probably down the road, we'll need to discuss whether or not to what extent we want to allow them once we know more about land divisions.
Commissioner Heberlein, did you start saying something?
Yeah, I was going to say I'm in favor of the revised language. That makes a lot more sense than plexus.
Okay. Commissioner Woods?
Yeah, my question is, why the redefinition? What are we getting at with that? Is that to reduce some concerns, or that's a question for you, Mr. Pauly?
Sure. So a couple of things. First of all, there is kind of, part of it is common use of the language, and we heard that a duplex, I think most people consider a duplex as one building with multiple units. I mean, we can get by that, but also I think there's use in defining them differently because the city may want to allow them at different points. For example, you may want to allow detached duplexes or cluster housing in existing development, but not allow it in new development. So having the separate definitions do allow flexibility there as well.
Yeah. Okay, I understand, and I remember that definition. I just wanted to make sure I was clear in my mind. So I'm okay with the revised definition as well.
Commissioner Willard?
Yes, I'm okay with the separation of the attached versus detached in the definitions.
Commissioner Dzerzhinsky?
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Commissioner Gallagher?
I'm okay with it.
Very good. So that answered the one question. Dan, your second question was?
So kind of two parts to this question. First of all, just confirmation from the commission of the level of interest in this land division idea and whether or not it's a good idea to move forward with. And if so, if the commission's supportive of tabling it to get some of these legal and questions answered, as well as see what happens with the state law, potential changes in state law around it.
Very good. Let's start with Commissioner Gallagher.
I'm okay with waiting.
Commissioner Heberlein.
Yeah, I'm okay with waiting. You know, it's hard for me to identify my level of priority for land divisions without some good examples on what that would look like, and along the lines of, you know, if we're allowing cluster houses, well, then what's really the need for a land division?
Commissioner Willard.
Yeah, I like what Commissioner Heberlein said on that. But yes, I'm in favor of tabling it and discussing the land division when we know more.
Commissioner Dzerzhinsky.
Yep, I also think it makes sense to wait.
Commissioner Woods.
Yeah, I don't think we have enough information right now. So yeah, I agree. We should wait and get more information. Commissioner
Greenfield.
I agree. It's complex. We should, we need to take time with it. And we need advance.
I'm in favor of that as well. We seem to have a consensus on this. Do we need a motion and second, or?
I don't think we do on this point. No, this is just kind of to help us form the information that we'll take to council and help us as we continue to refine these through the process, through taking it to council and through the public outreach coming up. And with that, we look forward to continuing to working on this. Next time we'll continue on with this, get more into the site design standards. A lot more of this to come. Appreciate all the time and thought the commission had on this tonight. It was very helpful.
We appreciate the time and effort you're putting into it. This is murky, and your presentation and walking us through it is creating clarity, it seems to me, where otherwise we would get all muddled up. At least that's what my view is. I don't know about the rest.
I Yeah, it sounded like Mr. Pauly didn't have any additional questions for the commission this evening. And we do not have any other work session items tonight.
Thank you. On our the packet, we received the City Council action minute for several of their meetings. There isn't a staff presentation, but staff is available if you have questions about anything. I don't see anybody raising their hands for questions on that. And also, okay, Commissioner Greenfield, I'm sorry.
I kind of miss having the liaison we used to have with with one of the city councilors as a very direct communication avenue with the council that allowed for more immediate feedback than we have just reviewing the council minutes. Is that something that could be reinstituted, or what's the feeling about that at the city?
Commissioner Greenfield, I am unaware of whether or not there's any desire to do that. That is a question I can ask of or have asked of the new mayor, whether there's a desire to go that route. I know the reasoning for it before was just that there are a number of coordinating committees with the county and the region and the state and a lot of different things that the counselors already volunteer or spend their time doing. And so having another meeting was often difficult or often had conflicts with other things that they were already doing. I'm happy to ask the question of whether kind of which format is most likely to continue and get back to you.
Fair enough.
Very good. Thank you. So it's not our asking them, it's them being willing. I think that it was originally set up that way to help create some of that overlap. It's just that it was really difficult for the counselors to attend sometimes 2 DRB meetings a month, the Planning Commission, it just with a lot of the other obligations that they had. So I am happy to ask and find out. Part of this is a decision I would imagine between the mayor and the city manager and the council. And, this change occurred, I believe, about 2 years ago, 2, maybe 3, to the summaries that go out. And I can just seek feedback and find out if there's change that they're looking at doing again, and let them know that it's something that the Planning Commission is interested in. That's what I heard. One person, I guess I should ask if
I realize that
that's what I should convey.
Council has access to the video of our meetings. I'm sure they'd love to watch them. They also have access, of course, to our minutes. And we to theirs. So the real issue is the immediacy of being able to cross-communicate. And I kind of miss it. It didn't always work well. We had we had different commissioners, different counselors in different years. But when it worked well, it worked well. And I kind of miss that.
And I wonder if maybe it's an option to do something more maybe on a quarterly basis or, twice a year or something like that where, it's not expecting a commitment of, yet another meeting every month for that commissioner, but maybe just something on a regular basis, but not to that level as a monthly commitment.
Or possibly a rotating visit by a different commissioner a different counselor each month.
So this, of course, I want to add that the most productive liaison that I have been part of have been the joint meetings, work sessions that we've had with the council. And that's where the kind of a brainstorming on substance happens. But it would be, I was thinking about that,
where there are really
they want to do this kind of dialogue and cross discussions, you know, we can do that from our ends by showing up at their meetings as well.
That's true. Good point. Except that not quite. I would feel awkward making comments at a city council meeting implicitly representing the commission when I'm not authorized to do that.
Understood. Understood. Okay. Any other comments, issues, questions? Ms. Mitchell, anything from the staff or the department?
Yeah, I thought it might be nice to just update the commission briefly, since this is an informational item, on, for any of those who are not aware already, some of the conversations happening in the community around the diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And as you're aware, when you forwarded the recommendation for the Equitable Housing Strategic Plan in the spring of last year, there was a co-recommendation that went along with it from all of you to also recommend a committee or a task force who would focus on equity issues for the city. It would impart one thing they may look at would be the Equitable Housing Strategic Plan and its implementation to ensure that equity is achieved in those housing policies. But a lot of your discussion was also it could be bigger and broader than that, and that was something that you wanted the City Council to consider. At the same time, there was a lot of conversation coming forward from community members themselves, particularly because of a lot of events that happened this summer spurred by the death of George Floyd. So the council has had a lot of conversations with community members around diversity, equity, and inclusion. They considered your recommendation as a part of that, and then also wanted to hear from the community members themselves what the interest is among the community members. There have been several community conversations on this item between councilors and city manager and staff with community members. There was a listening session in December, and that was a bigger listening session held over Zoom. And then just on Monday, there was another meeting with some community members as a follow-up to that based on feedback we've received and recommendations that were around a task force. I'm not sure what the exact title of it will be, but it would be a task force that would be looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, staff, and facilitated by Bill De La Cruz, who we have hired as a consultant to help us facilitate these conversations. Had conversations with community members to help provide feedback on the purpose of that task force, how to solicit applicants for that task force, and what we should be looking at in terms of who to have seated on that task force and how to go through that process. So we are seeking that input from community members. So I just wanted to be able to provide all of you with an update, really, just informationally to let you know that that's moving forward. I know some of you are involved. I saw Commissioner Woods in the conversation on Monday. If he'd like to add anything, I would like to invite him to do that. But the information will be going out relatively soon. We're still working on putting information together and working with community members to do that in the best way. But there will be information going out soon soliciting applicants for that task force. So.
Gee whiz, Miranda, you just, you hit all the points. You really did. And that last point of the task force and looking for participants to be on that, you're right. That information will be going out very soon. I know Brian and the other city participants, or I should say individuals working on that. But it is something that the people of Wilsonville are very interested in, and we're looking forward to see what comes out of this. I, for one, am very happy to see the city embracing this. It's needed, and then it ties right in line with everything we're doing with equitable housing, DEI, and having a really strong policy on that is important. So you did a good job. Thank you.
Jerry?
Thank you, Commissioner Woods.
Yeah, I strongly concur with what Commissioner Woods is saying. What I don't concur in is the use of the terminology task force. I was involved in the discussion that led to the recommendation to council to establish an agency of some sort. But I was at that time made a strong point, and I'd like to reiterate it, that it should not be considered a task force, because task force implies that it's something that can be completed in some given number of meetings and with an end point. And this is not a kind of a task that has an end point like that. It is an ongoing concern that the city needs to embrace and pursue. And I strongly recommend it as some form of standing committee, not a task force. I really would like to avoid that terminology because it creates a wrong impression.
Jerry, let me just make you aware that the task force is just the first beginning, moving toward, hopefully, a committee. You're 100% correct. The task force has a beginning and an end, by definition. And you're right, we wouldn't want to call this a task force. So this is just the beginning of hopefully working. The task force itself would then make that recommendation to the city that this become a permanent DEI committee.
Make that part of its task.
Yes, so I'd like to add a little bit to that, if I may, Commissioner Greenfield and Chair Mesbach. A lot of that has been a part of this conversation so far. There's a couple pieces I'd like to pull from. One is the facilitator first of all, as city staff, we are not wanting to fully form or direct what all is to come out of this process. We really are working with community members to help identify what does come out of it. And so in part because of that, the council so far has not determined that it's necessarily a standing committee, but is looking to a task force to really help provide a framework, so to speak, or a set of actions and steps that then would be taken on by the city, and potentially one of those recommendations would be for a standing committee or board of some type that would be focused on this and would provide recommendations and assessments on all of the work and decision-making that the city does. That is one of the recommendations that came out of a similar process that was facilitated in Lake Oswego. And so they had a task force and they had a discrete task, which was to kind of come up with these key recommendations and a framework. Coming out of that, one of them was a permanent committee. And so they are going through that process now, or have just started that process of establishing an ongoing committee to do this work. So I think there's already an acknowledgement that that's a very likely outcome, but we don't want to get ahead of ourselves in doing that.
Okay, thank you. I'm satisfied.
Thank you. Very good. Are we ready for adjournment? Have we had enough fun? Somebody make a motion for adjournment?
I move to adjourn.
Thank you. Excellent. Very good. See you all later.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Goodbye.